how normalized sports betting has pretty much become within just the general broader sports culture itself. They can't really talk about sports with like friends or like family without the topic of sports betting coming up. We're watching like a football game. Oh, you have like a $10 parlay on this game. That's great. Parlays are definitely probably the riskiest bet you could make on different sports books. Sports books know that. They know that they're the most profitable type of bet.
Today's guest is Chance Dow, an incoming second-year clinical psychology graduate student at the University of Memphis, conducting research in the Tennessee Institute for Gambling Education and Research Lab. His work focuses on sports betting, responsible gambling, and related marketing strategies. But before we dive into his research, I have one thing to ask from you. So many of you watch the channel regularly, but you aren't yet subscribed. If you could do me the favor of hitting that subscribe button right now, it would make a huge difference. And my promise to you is that in return, I will continue to work hard every single day to spread the message that gambling addiction is real. Chance, thanks for joining the podcast. Really appreciate you taking the time to share not only your journey as a doctoral student, but also the research that you've been working on in the space of gambling addiction. So thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Rob. I'm excited. To share some stuff.
Yeah, man. I think we're going to be excited to hear it. A lot of times on this channel, we're focusing on the stories and we're not diving too much into the statistics, into the research. So it's an angle that I think is necessary to kind of paint the full picture about gambling addiction. For those that are just seeing you for the first time, what motivated you to do the work that you do now?
I kind of have my own experience when it comes to, gambling. That got me interested specifically within gambling research. So back when I was like 16, I did a little bit of gambling myself. Back then I played a lot of video games. I still do. Played a lot of Counter-Strike, Global Offensive back in the day. There's these things called skins, which are pretty much like cosmetics that you can apply to, the different weapons that you have in those games. And those skins, interestingly are liquid, right? You can sell those to get, monetary currency on like third-party websites, like actual money. But you can actually also gamble with them, which is what I did. I was probably slinging around a few $100s, which is, interesting looking back, thinking how, I was a 16-year-old being able to do that. It's more regulated now these days. But that, really got me interested in, this concept of how gambling can lead to something that can become like so problematic. And that's what led me to the University of Memphis, where now I'm doing some pretty solid gambling research. So hopefully have an impact on folks who might be struggling.
Yeah, that's a really interesting origin story for why you do the work that you do. I'd seen the I don't know if you saw like the CoffeeZilla series that he did on Counter-Strike.
Yeah.
And for those that didn't see it, essentially he was diving into the fact that people that get onto this website, they might be as young as 12, 13, 14 years old. And they're basically in a position where they can actually gamble the same way they would now on a FanDuel or a DraftKings through these Counter-Strike casino websites. So today I want to hear a little bit about the research that you've been doing. And you laid it out in a bit of an elevator pitch before we started talking. Maybe as an introduction, what was the focus of the research that you were doing on gambling addiction?
Yeah, so my focus kind of started with this concept of responsible gambling. Which when it comes to responsible gambling, a lot of consumers might not know what responsible gambling actually means when they hear those words. But what I specifically focused on going into, the projects that I've been doing these past couple years was this concept of like responsible gambling messaging. So, you'll see maybe on like billboards or TV advertisements, those little like texts at the bottom of the screen that says, if you have a gambling problem, like call 1-800-GAMBLER, gamble responsibly, stuff like that. So like the prevention side of gambling is what kind of got me interested within this field. Folks start gambling, they start sports betting, they start engaging in these things, but we want to make sure folks are doing it in a way that's responsible, making sure people are setting limits. And that's my main focus is responsible gambling messaging. And then on top of that, how that can be kind of integrated into what consumers are specifically being exposed to on a daily basis, which is gambling and sports betting advertising on TVs, billboards, your phones, social media. So that's how like that first line of defense concept kind of comes into play, because every day you don't have to gamble, you don't have to sports bet to constantly be exposed to advertising related to sports betting, especially, these days when it's so prevalent.
I'm interested in hearing the results of that study, because when I would see responsible gambling messaging, I'd have a couple thoughts. The first thought was like, there's nothing responsible about gambling. Why are they calling it that? The second was like, it felt like they were saying, hey, loser, if you lost a bunch of money, give us a call. It wasn't so much a line of defense as you put it. It felt more of like a half-assed thing that people had to say. And again, this is just my interpretation. So I'm interested in hearing what kind of conclusions you found through the research, because if it's done correctly, that messaging can be really important. But if it's done in a way that people don't really think is realistic, or they think maybe it's disingenuous the way that it's being done, it's almost something that's like to make fun of to a certain extent, if that makes sense. What did you find in the research?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's kind of the main point that came up in the project I ran about a year ago now, where I recruited a bunch of specifically college students who sports bet, because I was wondering what this population thought about sports betting in general, and then on the other end, responsible gambling as it's tied to sports betting. The general sentiment that these folks were talking about is that, responsible gambling messaging from sports books, from operators, places like FanDuel or DraftKings, they don't feel that it's genuine at all, right? Because one, they're promoting things like, within the literature, it's called inducements. Sometimes a lot of people call them promotions. So things like, bet $5, get $200 for free, or matched deposits, where you deposit $1,000, we'll match it in free play. Things like that are super motivating. But when consumers are seeing those things advertised to them on TV or social media or whatever, and then along with those advertisements, they see gamble responsibly, they don't feel that's like genuine at all, because there's a profit motive involved. They feel like sports books want to make money from them losing bets, right? So that kind of defeats the purpose of trying to also at the same time promote a responsible gambling message. So that was one of the main sentiments that popped up within that study, is this kind of pervasive mistrust of the gambling industry, because they recognize, like, they kind of just want to make money from me. Why are they trying to tell me to gamble responsibly? You know what I mean?
Yeah. What's fascinating to me is, like, if you look at an adjacent industry, which again, it's a little bit different, but it's kind of related, is like the finance industry. If we look at like Charles Schwab commercial, like the CFTC makes them put a disclaimer on that commercial that if you invest with them, you could lose your investment, you could lose your principal. So it basically says, in so many words, invest responsibly. I don't feel like there's that same mistrust of a Schwab or a Robinhood as there is with a FanDuel or a DraftKings. What do you think causes that, besides just the profitability? Because all companies are trying to make money, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think there's tons of different factors that can lead to that mistrust. Obviously, a lot more research needs to be done, especially within the U.S., because a lot of research that I'm aware of when it comes to gambling advertising is from outside of the U.S. But I think we can learn a lot from places like Canada or Australia. Consumers see all of these motivating factors tied to these advertisements. Things like celebrity endorsements, for example. They might look at a sports betting advertisement and see, like, okay, we have folks like, Kevin Hart trying to promote, placing parlays to me, right? And then at the same time, you have like a small, like barely noticeable responsible gambling gambling messaging at the bottom. And it's like, this isn't like impacting me in any way, right? And, talking about things like celebrity endorsements, those are, empirically like super motivating. Consumers are going to be more likely to like pick up a product advertised by a celebrity, and they're going to make that choice faster than maybe just like some random Joe Schmo advertising it.
That DraftKings commercial campaign worked so well because anytime someone talks about a celebrity in gambling advertising, it's that Kevin Hart dude. Every single time people are like, Kevin Hart with DraftKings. Like, it's like a mental correlation that just clicks like that. So for the rest of his life, he's going to be the DraftKings guy, no matter if that ends up being a good or bad thing.
Yeah, right.
Which, it's up to interpretation. But so you would say then that the general sentiment in that study was that there was a lack of trust for the gambling industry. Playing, and we're on a page where I share stories of gambling addiction. It's not like we're a big fan of the gambling industry here, but like theoretically, what could be done so that responsible gambling messaging, if it was actually deemed effective, could resonate with the audience?
I mean, that's the main thing I'm trying to find out within my work, and I think there's a lot of unanswered questions that we still need to get to. But like I said, I think we can take a lot of information from other countries, because I guess going back to the celebrity thing, you see places like Canada and in Ontario actually banning the use of like celebrity or influencer advertising for sports betting and gambling ads. But it's interesting because they actually still allow them to promote responsible gambling advertisements, celebrities and influencers. So I think a lot more, policy changes and, regulatory practices at both the state and federal level within the U.S. specifically can definitely help sort of alleviate the potential harms that can be caused from, sports betting and gambling advertisement exposure.
Has the increase of advertising actually caused more like tangible harms as a result? Like, are people gambling in a different way than before the advertising campaigns really took hold in the US?
I can't speak as much for US based data. Obviously sports betting is a relatively new thing within the states, being legalized just in 2018. But looking at other countries, we see that exposure to gambling advertising can do multiple things. It increases the frequency that someone gambles, so they gamble more with more exposure to advertising. It increases their duration of gambling, so they gamble for longer periods. It makes someone more likely to start gambling if they haven't gambled previously, and then it also makes someone more likely to maintain gambling, so they'll continue gambling. And then along with that, it increases the intensity that an individual might gamble, so they'll gamble more money. And along those lines, there's different factors that contribute to those different, behavioral outcomes, right? So the things that I talked about prior, things like inducements, you start introducing inducements into the equation, advertising, promoting free play, pretty much free money if you start gambling on our platform. That can exacerbate that problem. And then you start introducing things like direct marketing. And when I say direct marketing, that includes things like push notifications. So getting a notification on your phone about, a free play offer that you can get, or getting emails about it. That's super motivating for consumers. All of those things kind of combine to make this like big, just like amalgamation of like something so motivating and so salient to consumers, especially if they're constantly exposed to it.
It's interesting to think about what the wider implications of that would be on like a culture. Let's call them the college age sports betting population. How does this mass wave of really salient, really impactful advertising change their perspective on sports betting as a whole? Does it make it so that people view it as investing? Does it make it so that people view it as a good thing? Like, what is the end implication for that group?
Yeah, and that kind of, I'm glad you asked that, because that's another big theme that came up from the study that I was talking about earlier with specifically college students. They talked about how things like sports betting advertising are so like pervasive that it contributes to actually changing their perspective surrounding sports betting specifically, right? They talk about how normalized sports betting has pretty much become within just the general broader sports culture itself. They'll say things like, they can't really talk about sports with like friends or like family without the topic of sports betting coming up, right? So like sports betting and sports itself are pretty much becoming one in the same, especially within like this specific college age population. And with that, normalization coming into play, that makes it a lot easier to normalize like sports betting in itself. So someone's talking about sports betting, it's like, oh, that's awesome. We're watching like a football game, like Steelers versus the Ravens or something. Oh, you have like a $10 parlay on this game. That's great. Qualitatively speaking, these folks are saying they're making it more fun to watch these sports games if they have a bet placed on that sport that they're watching. So it's definitely an interesting concept, talking about like normalization there.
If your gambling's starting to feel less like fun and more like stress, trust me, you're not alone. Millions of us know what it's like to say, just one more bet, or feel that urge that's really difficult to explain to someone else. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Evive. Think of it as having a recovery companion right in your pocket. Someone that knows exactly what you're going through. No lectures, no pressure, just genuine support without judgment. Right when you need it. If you download Evive right now, you'll get guaranteed free access through 2026. Not a trial or some limited version, but the entire platform. Because Evive believes that anyone that's out there that's struggling should get the support that they need. Download Evive today and take the first step towards redefining your relationship to gambling. Evive is only available in select countries. Check the description of this video to download now. I wonder what it feels like for even younger demographics than that, because like, how old are you?
I'm 24.
You're 24. All right, I'm 26. And so, like, did you watch ESPN growing up?
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit. So when you watched ESPN, like, when we would get score updates or there would be a game coming up, like, do you remember what it would say in, like, the ticker below on the screen? It would say something like, okay, the Phillies are playing the Orioles at 7 tonight. Here's both starting pitchers' records. The Phillies are 3 games back in the NL East, something like that, right?
Yeah.
But now what does it say? It says, here's the 2 teams that are playing each other. Here's the lines of which team's more likely to win. Here's the over-under. And here's our FanDuel TV best recommended pick for the game, right? Like, it's like a way, way different conversation than it used to be. So imagine, like, what do you think the implications will be for an even younger population? Think kids who are now in middle school.
I think definitely for younger populations, that can definitely be super motivating, super salient, right? Because within the United States specifically, there's like codes of conduct in place that were specifically through like the American Gaming Association that say, like, if you're advertising, gambling or advertising sports betting, you have to put in an effort to not make it appealing to like a younger audience, an under 21 audience. And that includes things like not using like celebrities that are appealing to younger audiences, or using like flashy colors that aren't appealing to younger audiences. But it's like, like where's the line? You know what I'm saying? I'm a little bit skeptical about that, because obviously younger audiences, like middle schoolers, like, or what have you, you're going to be interested in watching sports. So when they're seeing these things pop up at the bottom, I feel like, it's going to be something that's like at least piques their interest, right? But like I said, a lot more research still needs to be done, specifically in the U.S.
That's an interesting rule from the AGA. I will give my opinion on the AGA in 1 second, but thinking about, like, okay, Kevin Hart was the lead in Jumanji. What population watched Jumanji as is the target audience, right? Like, right. I don't think it was college-age students. I don't think it was 21-year-olds. So we can't use celebrities that appeal to a younger audience, but we're using a celebrity that appeals to a younger audience. Well, who regulates that? Right.
And it's interesting you say that, because, and this is, me speaking from my opinion now, not anything research related, but, like Kevin Hart specifically has done collabs in the past with people like, Kai Cenat. He doesn't make content specifically geared towards like children, but his demographic on Twitch is, I think it's like over 50% of people under the age of 18. So, it's interesting to kind of look at, like, are these, advertisements appealing to younger audiences? We don't really know.
We don't really know. It's like, it's such an easy one, right? Like take Aiden Ross, for example, like as another example of a streamer who now streams slots. Like, previously he was streaming what kinds of things? He did a lot of lifestyle content. I'm not a huge streaming guy, so correct me if I get any of this wrong if you happen to know. But he was definitely streaming himself playing video games. The target demographic of that video game was probably a 16-year-old boy. So now he's continued to make content geared towards that age group over and over again, but now he does slot machines. So he's basically making slot content for a 16-year-old to consume. And I think we see that across the board with streamers who have gone from video games over to gambling type streams.
Yeah.
My understanding of the AGA, the American Gaming Association, was quite different than what it actually is. I thought that the American Gaming Association was made to protect consumers from bad gaming practices. The main stakeholders of the American Gaming Association are the casinos and gambling industry. And the job of that association is to protect their business interests in the United States. So who is the group that protects problem gamblers? Is there like a discernible link between sports betting and like masculinity or success in this population? Or is this population using sports betting for a purpose other than entertainment?
That's I'm glad you brought that up, because part of my research interest also involves, this notion and concept of masculinity. And I feel like sports betting definitely has a role within that, because, the way that folks, especially younger audiences, are engaging in sports betting these days involves kind of like this just circle of, you could call it masculinity, where people are placing bets within large groups, with their friends, their homies or whatever, and they're watching the same game. And then that might lead to maybe more of a motivation to place higher bets to kind of outplay like your friends or whatever. Because it's obviously inherently fun to say, like, look at how much money I won. I won hundreds of dollars. Like, how much money did you win? And then some of the things that the participants in my study talked about involve the fact that like it's fun to like share screenshots within like group chats of different wins that they got, but they're less likely to share like a screenshot of like losing a bet, right? So I think there's definitely this notion of masculinity involved, where it's definitely masculinizing to win a lot of money, to kind of show your friends that, I'm like engaging in sports betting in a way that makes me look skilled and smart, right? Because, a lot of what sports betting might entail is knowledge surrounding different players, different teams, different, stats, knowing like the over and unders on like different outcomes. So that's definitely an interesting topic, and I definitely would like to look more into it within my own research.
Yeah. Within that topic, it's like money is seen as kind of the scoreboard. So this is what I think like a lot of people without a gambling problem would struggle to understand about someone like myself. It's like the money is a measure of your success at doing the thing that you say you are very good at doing. So within this population that you're describing, they are bragging to their friends about their big wins. Well, they have to say how much money they won, because that is the determinant of success in that case. I actually think that it might help that population to talk about the frequency of the times that they won instead of the dollar amounts that were wagered. I guess that could even fall into like a weird harm reduction category. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I personally don't know much about that. So are you saying like, it'd be a lot better to talk about I've won like 20 times compared to like I've won like $2,000?
So money's so subjective in this case, right? Like say that you have a gambling problem, your friend doesn't, but your friend is a trust fund kid. When you say like, oh man, like I won like $2,000 last week, your friend's like, cool, like that's what I bet every time that I do gamble. And now all of a sudden you feel like you have to bet more to kind of step up and win. Whereas if you said like I won 4 bets out of 5 last week, and your trust fund friend's like, oh, I only won 2, then that kind of gives you the edge in that weird like pissing contest type competition. Like I don't think either is good, but I'm thinking about like what's happening to people who are using gambling as their only sense of showing success in life.
Yeah, that's That's an interesting topic. I don't know if there's any research on that, but it would be interesting to see like what the difference is between, talking to your friends about how many times you've won as opposed to like how much money you've won, because money is super subjective to the individual, right? $20 could be a lot of money for someone else compared to another person who might be betting hundreds of dollars per bet, right? But I think another interesting thing along those lines is maybe seeing like what type of bet people are talking about they're winning, right? Because a lot of the times people talk about their favorite bets being like parlays, right? Because you have all of these legs that are just different bets that involve, different players, different outcomes. If someone's going to make a field goal or if someone's going to make a certain amount of, touchdowns or whatever. So I think that contributes to people feeling like they have knowledge surrounding sports betting because it's so many things that needs to happen for like the bet to actually be placed. I don't know the specific statistic, but parlays are definitely probably the riskiest bet you could make on different sports books. And sports books know that they know that they are the most profitable type of bet. So, telling your friends like, hey, I placed like a 6-leg parlay, and you know what? 5 of the 6 legs hit, but my last one almost made it. Well, it's tough because your bet still lost, but so I think there's definitely different factors there.
What do you think of then, like, I guess it's referred to as content marketing, which is when like a sportsbook operator would see someone post their winning parlay, say on Twitter, and then they like repost it and they're like, yo, like look at this big winner on the parlay here. Like what do you think that kind of advertising, like the end implication of that's going to be? Because I think that's really playing with fire.
Yeah.
Because none of that has any kind of RG messaging on it at all.
Oh, absolutely not. Especially if it's just coming from, someone who's not obligated to put a responsible gambling message on a post like that, especially on social media like Twitter/X or whatever. I still think those can definitely be super motivating. There's not as much literature surrounding like influencer advertising, right? So obviously influencers are still involved in pushing things related to sports betting when it comes to advertising. So along those lines, something like that could involve like, hey, look at this like 6-leg parlay that I just won. I won like thousands of dollars from this. That could potentially lead someone to think like, hey, I could do the same thing. I could do maybe I could do a 7-leg parlay and get like even more money, right? Because it's obviously super motivating to see other people's wins.
And then before we got on the call today, you had mentioned that you watched one of my previous podcasts with Dr. Philip Newell from Bristol University. And one thing that he was studying that I thought was like really interesting, despite how I'm going to describe it, was that he found that no matter what the responsible gambling message was, if it was happening on the same advertisement as any type of gambling imagery, so any type of like a guy playing on a soccer field or like a guy on a slot machine, if there was a message that said like gamble responsibly, it actually had the opposite effect and it made people want to gamble more. Whereas the only thing that made people want to gamble less was showing completely unrelated commercials about wood sealant, I think is what he said it was. It was like some random British commercial.
Yeah.
Like, is there even a type of responsible gambling messaging that could go out there that would help people?
There's definitely evidence out there that shows different types of responsible gambling messaging work better than what's in the industry right now, which really isn't much right now. The standard like helpline number or the standard gamble responsibly, stuff like that isn't gonna work, and we know that it's not gonna work. But there's different types of messaging, things like they're called self-appraisal messaging, which I'm specifically looking at now. It's kind of responsible gambling messaging that, consumers read it and it makes them kind of reflect on their own gambling behavior. So an example could be like, are you losing more than like money, or something along those lines. And that kind of makes consumers reflect on, okay, maybe I'm losing more than money. Maybe I'm losing time with like friends or family. Maybe I'm, losing things related to education. I'm not putting as much time within my studies, or, I'm things related to like your occupation. I'm like watching games on the weekend instead of like picking up shifts or something like that. So there's definitely different types of messaging that are a lot better than what's currently in the industry right now. I'm currently working on a study for my thesis that hopefully I will start collecting data on here in a month or two, where I'm kind of taking what I learned from those focus groups that I ran, where consumers think there's not a genuine effort from the side of operators in promoting responsible gambling messaging that work, because there's a profit motive and they don't trust them, right? So I'm taking that and I'm actually testing it within an experiment. What if the responsible gambling message isn't tied to like a sports betting commercial sponsored by, a sports book? So I'm seeing, I actually created like a fake sports book, a nice animated logo and everything, created my own ad. And I'm going to test a responsible gambling message within an ad sponsored by a sports betting operator compared to a non-operator. So within the second condition, I'm testing a state body, like a governmental body. So, currently I live in the state of Tennessee, and I'm going to run the study within the state of Tennessee. So I'm using the Tennessee Department of Health, which kind of promote like public health efforts and stuff like that. To see if responsible gambling messaging from that organization compared to the sports book would mean more to consumers, if consumers would trust that more. And I feel like it will. That's my hypothesis. I think consumers are going to trust the non-operator more when it comes to promoting responsible gambling messaging. And I think that's going to be quite an interesting finding, because there's different implications for that, right? If messaging, responsible gambling messaging from operators aren't working for consumers, why are we still putting money into it, right? Because millions and millions of dollars go into promoting like responsible gambling ad campaigns from operators. So like, where should that money be going instead?
All right, we're gonna roll both of those, and we want you to let us know in the comments which one you would trust more and why.
At KingBet Sportsbook, we are dedicated to promoting safe and responsible gaming to all Tennesseans so you can stay safe while enjoying sports betting. We want you to take a moment to ask yourself, what else might you be putting at risk? At the Tennessee Department of Health, we are dedicated to promoting safe and responsible gaming to all Tennesseans so you can stay safe while enjoying sports betting. We want you to take a moment to ask yourself, what else might you be putting at risk?
Chance, thank you for coming on and for sharing your research and sharing your perspective on how you think gambling advertising and responsible gambling advertising are going to impact future generations. To anyone that's watching that wants to hear a story of someone in recovery from gambling addiction, check out this video next. Let's keep getting better together, one day at a time.